ارائه مفاهیم معنوی و نظری شیعه در دنیای غرب به زبان انگلیسی کار جدیدی نیست، ولی از نظر ارائه دقیق و استفاده از منابع اصیل و استفاده نشده، خانم ربکا مسترتون، دکتر ربکا مسترتون در کتاب خودش تحت عنوان معنویت شیعه برای قرن 21 تلاش کرده برای مخاطب مسلمان شیعه و غیر مسلمان و غیر شیعه در دنیای غرب بخش‌های مختلفی رو از معنویت شیعه و آنچه که برای انسان قرن 21 مفید واقع می شود عرضه کنه. این کتاب مجموعی از مقالات و سخنرانی‌های اوست که در یک قالب مجزا ولی در این حال مرتبط با هم در سال‌های مختلف گردآوری شده و اکنون به عنوان کتاب در یک مجموعه عرضه شده. Dr. Rebecca Masterton, thank you very much for accepting my invitation to talk about your work and your books and your studies. I appreciate if you can talk about yourself, your background and your studies if you like.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to this discussion. So I was born in the south of England, near the sea, and
everywhere is near the sea in England.
Yes, true. Well, unless you're in the centre of the country. But I was raised in a very small town, and my family is technically Christian, but we were raised in a very secular environment. So I did go to church as a child, but I didn't actually understand anything about Christianity. I wasn't really taught any of the doctrines. So I would say it was probably more of a cultural practice than any kind of serious belief in the Christian doctrines. So as I grew up, I was seeking spiritual knowledge, because I always felt that I'm not from this world, we are not from this world, and that a part of us is connected to a higher level of reality. So I started to search around, seek different kinds of knowledge, read different books, and step by step I discovered Islam. So when I was 19, I was studying in Japan, and I was traveling back from Japan via Malaysia. I went to Malaysia. That was my first experience of a Muslim country, and I really appreciated the culture there. Then after that, I made friends. I had a few Muslim friends back in London, and one particular friend, we both went out to Egypt in the mid-90s because she was studying Arabic, and I went just to have a break from my work life and to think about the direction of my life. And Egypt was really the turning point where I felt I want to become Muslim.
Why Shia?
So when I converted, I was nominally Sunni, basically because I didn't know about the different sects, the different schools of thought, and when I came back to England, I discovered that the kind of Islam that's practiced here, or was being practiced in the 90s, was very Salafi, borderline, Wahhabi. It was very political, and it was a bit different from what I had experienced in Egypt. So I did join a Sufi order briefly, because I was primarily seeking spiritual knowledge, and I found that the Salafiyya and the Wahhabiyya were very anti-thinking. I mean, for me, I'm all about thinking. I can't function without thinking, but the kind of Wahhabi and Salafi brand of Islam is very against thinking and reflecting and analysing, and that did not suit me, or I didn't get on with it at all. when I discovered this Sufi order, it was a little bit better, because at least we had some spiritual practices, but there still wasn't really much kind of intellectual discussion or research into Islam. And then when I started my doctorate, I also started teaching at the Islamic College in London in 2001, just 2 weeks after 9/11, and I didn't know that Islamic College was Iranian, and I didn't know that half of the staff was Shia. So I had been nominally Sunni for about 4 years, mainstream Sunni, a little bit Sufi for about 4 years. When I was teaching at Islamic College, they were publishing the hadith collections of the Ahlul Bayt, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam, translating them into English and publishing them, and they asked me to just check over the translation, like as a final check before it goes to publication. So it was because of that I came across the narrations of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and then I started to ask myself, well, why have I never heard of these Imams? I mean, for 4 years I had attended various Sunni majalis, and majalis with some of the more educated Sunnis like Habib Ali Jifri, Hamza Yusuf, those kinds of people, and they're very educated. But when I read the narrations, the teachings of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, one of the first questions that came to me was, I have been studying with some of the most educated Sunnis that you can find in the West, at least, so why is it that I've never heard of the Imams? And also, as a Sunni, you hear about the great scholars of the Sunni tradition, and again I asked myself, why is it that as a Sunni you hear about how great the previous scholars are in Sunni history, but none of these great scholars in Sunni history have again mentioned the Imams. So I discovered that basically there's been a cover-up. That was just the only way of putting it, that there has been an organized cover-up of this history.
What is the reason you think what's the reason about this cover-up, you think?
I mean, I think it just goes right back to the event of Saqifa, and it goes back to the governments that benefited from the event of Saqifa, that have benefited for 1400 years. They've benefited from what happened then by being in power and maintaining their position in power.
Can you tell us briefly about your studies for your PhD and the topic of your dissertation, please?
Yes, it's a little bit complex. So when I started my doctorate, I was Sunni, and halfway through my doctorate I came to the path of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. But I decided to not change the topic of my doctorate just because I had changed my madhab, so to speak. So my doctorate was technically about two works that were published from West Africa, Senegal, and they were about the journey of the soul. So we have in the Islamic tradition what you call the stories of the journey of the soul. Shihabuddin Sohrawardi, he had a whole collection of that, and some influences from Sohrawardi did reach West Africa. Ibn Sina also reached. There was a kind of a line of communication between Middle East, southern Spain, and West Africa. This is how the texts and the ideas were exchanged. And there's a narrative from West Africa called Kaidara. Kaidara is...
It's from Senegal.
Yeah. Kaidara is the guardian of gold and knowledge. There's a beautiful story about three friends who go to...
Is that Islamic study or before that?
It's pre-Islamic, but it has some Islamic influences. In fact, I have not found the source of it. I sometimes suspect that the scholar who narrated it, I sometimes suspect he made it up. Yeah, Amadou Hampateba, his name was.
Can you say it again?
Amadou Hampateba was his name, yeah. And he was a scholar from West Africa. He did a lot to try to preserve the West African spiritual heritage. He worked for UNESCO for a bit. And so he transcribed this narration about Kaidara and these three friends who travel to this intermediary realm where they encounter Kaidara, who's the guardian of gold and knowledge. And they receive 3 oxen loads of gold from Kaidara, which symbolizes knowledge. And as they are leaving this intermediary realm, they get tested on their ethics and their values, their attitude towards the gold that they've been given. And only one of them passes the test. So the other 2
failed.
One's greedy, he's going to keep it for himself, and the other one, I can't remember what he was going to do with it, but only one of them manages to leave this spiritual realm. His name is Hammadi, and when he comes back to this realm, he's a very virtuous king, and he uses the gold to benefit the poor and so on and so forth. And then eventually he's tested again. Kaidara turns up in the form of a little beggar and wants to have dinner with Hammadi, who's the king, and Hammadi's guards say, "Go away, you dirty old beggar," and Hammadi says, no, we have to treat him with respect, he's an old man, let him in, and so on. So he treats him with courtesy, and then Kaidara reveals who he is. And I've actually recently noticed that a part of Kaidara's speech at the end of this narrative is very like the esoteric speeches attributed to Imam Ali alayhi salam.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So, but aside from that, there are other themes, which is that, so there was that, and then I also looked at a novel which was published in the 60s by a Senegalese writer, which is a reverse of the journey of the soul. So it's about a young Senegalese boy. He's under training by a spiritual master, and because Africa is being westernized and it's occupied by the French, he is torn away from his spiritual master, and he's forced to go to what they called the white school. And he's basically, you know,
as part
brainwashed.
of assimilation.
Yes. So essentially he's kind of brainwashed in the name of modernization and secularization and forward thinking. His connection to himself is severed. His internal spiritual connection to his inner being and to the spiritual realm is cut. And then he goes to Paris to study philosophy, and things get worse when he goes to Paris to study philosophy. He loses himself. It's a great tragedy. And then eventually his father realizes, what's happened to my son? I have to get him back to Africa. But it's too late. He comes back and he's like this empty vessel. But everyone around him, you know, the French intellectuals, think that they've done him a great favor by modernizing him. But actually what they've done is to kill him inside. And I felt very strongly about this, because I feel that this is what's happened to the West. The youth in the West, you know, I mean, all of this secularization program, which began with industrialization as well, has been imposed upon Western societies, and then it's expanded out into all parts of the world. It's a kind of a form of brainwashing, you know, reconstituting our minds and the way we think, the way we see the world, how we understand reality. So at the heart of my thesis is really the discussion on how we perceive reality, whether we have an understanding of esoteric knowledge, whether we are connected to the higher spiritual realms and understand that there are higher spiritual realms,
Yeah.
or whether we just see the material realm only, and we exist as if there is only the material realm. And I argue that for people who have an inherent connection to the spiritual levels of reality, then to live in a society where most people only have an understanding of the material level of existence, it's very suffocating and oppressive. So we have another contradiction there, which is that, you know, Western secular society sells itself as being free, and that you can, you know, you've got all these freedoms in Western society. But my argument is that because Western secularized society works to cut off our connection to our inner self, and works to cut off our connection to the higher levels of existence, then in fact we are becoming trapped inside this artificial reality that's being created for us by the industrialists and people in the entertainment industry and whatever else. We're now living in a culture that has been artificially created by even secular thinkers and, you know, all sorts of different forces. And
So-called modernism.
yes.
You have a previous publication called Passing Through the Dream.
Yes.
Can you tell us briefly about that book?
Yes. That is a collection of 8 short stories, and when I mean I've written since I was in my late teens, but when I came into Islam, then I had to think about how I was going to write, and Passing Through the Dream is I found that books, novels, fiction that is written, or at least published in the West, by Muslim writers or writers from a Muslim culture, most of those books are covertly against Islam. So the books coming out that have been written by intellectuals or thinkers from Muslim majority countries that are published as novels are all critical of Islamic culture. And of course Western, you know, society loves that. They want to read novels about, they want to have a peek inside a Western, they want to have a peek inside a Muslim culture, what's going on inside it. But they also want an affirmation that, yeah, no, we are superior, our culture is better. And so I wanted to write a collection of short stories that are positive towards Islam, pro-Islam, but not didactic, because what we find with a lot of the Islamic publications is that, and again, at least in the West, because we don't have so much of a variety of films or novels or writing in the West, I wanted to write some stories that are fiction, that are positive towards Islam, but that are not didactic. They're not preaching to you about how to be a good Muslim. They are rather...
You mean direct advertising? Something.
Yeah. I wanted to write stories that, again, explore our experience of reality. So these 8 short stories feature very different scenarios and different cultures, different personalities. It does include the spiritual realm, journeys to the spiritual realm. But the stories are more about how we live in 2 worlds side by side. As a Muslim, or as someone who has a sense of the spiritual world, but you're living in a secular world, then you go between those 2 worlds. You live in 2 worlds at the same time.
در دهه 40 خورشیدی ویترین کتاب فروشی ها متأثر از موج باستانگرایی و غرب زدگی از کتاب‌هایی با همین مضمون پر شده بود. اما در بین مردم کتاب‌های دیگری هم رواج داشت. کتاب‌هایی که تبلیغ ایدئولوژی‌های چپگرایانه را دنبال می‌کرد. در همین حال مرتضی مطهری، استاد الهیات دانشگاه تهران، کتابی را بر اساس احادیث و روایات و تاریخ اسلام تألیف کرد و نام آن را داستان راستان گذاشت. داستان‌هایی که قهرمانان آن شخصیت‌هایی راسترو یا در زبان قرآن صدیقین نام داشتند. دوستان استاد مطهری که کار کردن روی این کتاب را بیفایده می‌دانستند، از او می‌خواستند به کارهای علمی بپردازد یا حداقل نام خودش را پس از انتشار بر جلد آن ننویسد. استاد مطهری در مقدمه کتاب در جواب برخی دوستان ساده اندیش از نوع تفکر آنان به عنوان یک بیماری اجتماعی نام میبرد که به صورت یک انحراف بزرگ از تعلیمات اسلامی در جامعه شکل گرفته و شیوع پیدا کرده است. از نظر استاد مطهری، جبران فقر در خصوص کتاب‌های مفید و سودمند وظیفه‌ای است که باید مورد توجه علما و اندیشمندان مسلمان قرار گیرد و مقیاس بزرگی و کوچکی کار به نتیجه و اثر آن بستگی فراوان دارد. نثر ساده و بی تکلف کتاب باعث شد داستان راستان مورد توجه قرار گیرد و در سال 1344 برنده جایزه یونسکو شود و به زبانهای انگلیسی و ژاپنی ترجمه گردد. تأثیرگذاری این کتاب به همین تلاش‌ها محدود نشد و نویسندگان و پژوهشگران با الهام از این سبک و سیاق به نگارش آثاری در این باره پرداختند.
Go back to your current book, Spirituality in the 21st Century. When you talk in this book, when you talk about the transforming our way of being, what do you mean by that? Because it's for some non-specialist people, this is a very vague term.
Yes.
Can you elaborate about that?
Yes. So it might be vague because it was given as a talk to a general audience. But when I came into Islam, what I felt was that Islam inculcates a way of being, as in how we are in the world, what is our worldview, what is our culture, what are our aims and objectives. And so Islam inculcates within us a way of thinking, manners, akhlaq, culture, and spiritual aims and objectives, as in we are thinking about the next world as well. But what I feel has happened to Muslims is that they have been secularized. They've undergone this secularization process so that, yes, they may fast and pray, but they don't really have a living, dynamic relationship with the spiritual levels of existence. And so, in essence, they are maybe 75% secular in their thinking and in their aims and objectives in the world, but they fast and pray. So this was kind of aimed at trying to raise some kind of awareness on how being Muslim is more than just the external practices. It's about, again, your experience of existence. It's about how you see reality and how you attain knowledge of higher levels of existence and transmit to the next generations.
It's very interesting. Let me ask you a bit harsh question.
Yes.
It's possibly unusual questions. In one of your lectures is called The Ethics of Brotherhood in Islam according to Amir al-Mu'minin Ali ibn Abi Talib. What kind of knowledge the Western girl and English girl can teach us about Imam Ali's understanding of brotherhood?
So,
according to your knowledge and experience.
Yeah. Well, what I have discovered when I converted and came to the path of Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, I myself have desired teachers and shuyukh, you know, to sit under and study. Alhamdulillah, I have been very blessed because of the people that I have, who have been my colleagues. I have associated with other scholars. So my colleagues were scholars, and I was fortunate to learn from people around me who were ulama and who were scholars. So another thing I learned was that a lot of Muslims don't read. They don't read the texts. They don't read the hadith. And for me, when I came into Islam, as a Muslim, when you want to learn about Islam, you read the hadith collections, you read Quran, you read tafsir. And what I found was that I was living among people, or working among people, not the ulama, not my colleagues, but again the mainstream Shia. They don't really read. They go to majlis, they learn from majlis.
Preaching or something.
Yeah. But they don't read the books. So from my perspective, all I was doing was reading the books according to a theme, and just commenting on what I have read in the books. But the audiences who don't read the books,
just oral audio.
Yes, they're saying
tradition.
Yeah, they're saying, mashallah, you know, we'd like to invite you to another talk. So so my original objective when I came into Islam and I came to the path of Ahl Bayt was that I haven't studied in this tradition. I haven't gone to Hausa. My background is academic, and I myself, I would love to study under some great teachers. But what happened was that because my field is teaching, or I've gone into teaching.
But you were not preacher.
No, I found that, I mean, I had been teaching already. So what I found was that teaching and presenting and preaching are very interlinked. Yeah. And it also
I didn't say it in a bad word. I said it in terms of speciality.
Right, yes. So, and also I think I'm very passionate about the welfare of humanity. So and that's what comes into preaching. So preaching is different from just teaching a subject in a university. With the preaching, it's very much about connecting to people on a human level, and that's part of my personal passion, I suppose you could say, to connect to people on a human level, and to translate the teachings or to explain the teachings in a context that means something to us, that makes sense to all of us in the situation that we're living in. And I just found, alhamdulillah, people invited me, so I went. So with this lecture, I was given a theme. This was for it was a conference on al-Balagha, and they gave me a list of themes. What do you want to talk on? And so I selected a theme, and then I applied my academic training to go through Nahj al-Balagha and the other hadith to pick out what did Imam Ali alayhi salam say about brotherhood. So I picked out the narrations, and
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Another harsh question for you. Do you think it's good to be passionate about the subject you are teaching or lecturing, or it's better to be neutral?
In an academic setting, you have to be neutral. Yes, and this is a huge theme at London University, where I studied, because I used to attend philosophy classes that were held by the Department of Religious Studies, and there are many people from different religious backgrounds or doing their doctorates on different religious subjects, and it was something that we used to debate and discuss a lot. My argument was that if you don't have some kind of experience of what you're talking about, then what you write about will always be limited in its understanding. Maybe interesting, you may have some facts and figures and so on, but it's to talk about how people experience the religion from within, then if you're not experiencing it, then you're not going to be able to write about it. But I would say that because I have ended up in this branch, yeah, it's definitely affected my job prospects in the world of academia.
Another part of the book I was very interested was your terminology of divine justice, and you repeat it in other articles as well. What is your definition by divine justice?
So this was another theme I was given, by a conference in America, and so of course it makes me think. They say, well, we want you to speak on this. Like, okay, let me reflect on that, and let me see what does Quran say, what do the narrations say about divine justice, and it's important. It's something that I have thought about lately, especially in relation to spirituality, because I feel it's often not addressed enough, because we live in such a horrific world with so much injustice, and so people are going to be thinking, well, where is the divine justice in that? And so to try to explain divine justice, that's called a theodicy. You try to give a justification for God, and to explain how God is just, because it's one of the pillars of the belief that God is just. And so how do we explain the existence of injustice if God is just? And the scholar Henri Corbin, who was at the Sorbonne, he talks about the drama of humanity, that humanity has a story. So we have a narrative that is unfolding down the generations, and this is what the Quran is saying, that we have been given the tools to be just by God, but the important issue is, how are we going to use our intellect? How are we going to use the gifts that we've been given? And part of that journey of the human being is about how we choose, which way we choose to go, what choices we make in terms of the gifts we've been given, and also something that I've really come to believe in, I suppose, is that attaining knowledge, and including spiritual knowledge, has to go through a process of pain and destruction.
بله، قربان و من خب در جلسات شرکت می‌کردم همراه آیت علامه طباطبایی که من شاگرد علامه بودم اون موقع، و همراه المرحوم علامه از قم می‌رفتم به تهران، و تنها کسی بودم که همراهیشون می‌رفتم به تهران. تو جلسات شبانه قم هم داشتن ایشون، ولی جلسات هر وقت قربان تهران بود 2 هفته یه بار جلسه در تهران تشکیل می‌شد، در یه منزلی که آقای قربان بود و بعضی از اساتید فرهیخته و منم شاید جوانترین آدم در اون جلسه اون روزگار بودم. یه وقت من یه سوال خصوصی از قربان کردم. خب معمولا از یه آدم فرانسوی که خیلی جنتلمن بود قربان، خیلی هم تیپیکال فرانسوی بود، سوال خصوصی از اشخاص کردن خیلی خوشایند نیست، ولی من کمی جسور بودم. یه شب چون در آثارش از لزوم مرشد در تصوف و عرفان اینا خیلی صحبت میکنه که آدم باید راهنما داشته باشه. من ازش پرسیدم خب آقای قربان تو که خودت سالکی اهل تصوفی، مرشد شما کیه؟ یه فکری کرد، یه لبخندی زد. علامه طباطبایی اونجا نشسته و از دور همچین گوشاش تیز شد ببینه این چه جواب میده. یه لبخند رندانه‌ای زد و گفت که من اویسی هستم. خب رندانه جواب داد، چون من میدونستم که اویسیه تنها فرقه ای از عرفا و صوفی هستن که به ضرورت وجود مرشد قائل نیستن، میگن آدم خودش که راه بره میرسه. چون اویس قرن حضوراً حضرت ختم مرتبت رو زیارت نکرد ولی واصل شد و مؤمن. گفت من اویسی ام. خب رندانه پاسخ بود. من باز جسارت کردم دوباره پرسیدم، گفتم خب آقای قربان شما اویسی هستید، شاید من خود منم اویسی باشم، اما شما بفرمایید که هر عارفی هر چه اویسی باشه غیر اویسی یه ذکر خفی داره، یه ذکر جلی. ذکر خفیتون رو نمیپرسم، اون که خب پنهانه. ذکر جلی شما چیه؟ اینجا دوباره یه مکسی کرد و یه قیافه خیلی جدی گرفت و این دفعه یه لبخندم خیلی جدی گفت ببین من شبها تا صبح، چون شبها کار میکنم روزا میخوام، گفت من شبها تا صبح که میشینم مطالعه میکنم و قال الباقر و قال الصادق میخونم، اونا ذکر جلیه.
یعنی معتقد به ائمه و
بله بود به عرفان. ببین اهل عرفان بود و عرفان رو در تشیع میدید و در ائمه ما اونا رو عارف کامل میدونه.
Going back to my previous questions, you are the only or one of the few scholars, especially the female scholars, who are very much interested in Nahj al-Balagha. I mean, I can see in your other writings you refer to Nahj al-Balagha in almost in every, well, not every, many documents. The other, one of the other lectures you had was about humanity in Nahj al-Balagha, and we are talking about about the issues in 20th century, 21st century as well. How can you adapt the humanities in Nahj al-Balagha to our current affairs and modern world?
Yes. I think again I was blessed to be associated with people who for them Nahj al-Balagha was very important. Actually it was one of the key reasons why I came to the path of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam as well, because someone had given me Nahj al-Balagha, which again as a Sunni I had never heard of, and when I was debating what is the right path, Sunni or Shi'i, I thought, okay, let me read Nahj al-Balagha because it's supposed to be sermons and lectures of Imam Ali alayhi salam.
And you know better than me, sorry to interrupt, some of the great interpreters and publishers of Nahj al-Balagha were Sunnis. Ibn Abdul Hadith, Subhi Saleh, they were Sunnis.
Yes, true. Slightly Mu'tazili or yes. But as a mainstream Sunni you never hear of it. Yeah. And even if you mention it to a mainstream Sunni, they'll say, oh yes, it's that Shia book. You know, that's about the level of their knowledge of it. And when I picked up Nahj al-Balagha, I was really, really hit by the personality of Imam Ali alayhi salam. I'm not saying it's I don't know if it's 100% authentic. I'm not an expert in that field, but I definitely feel that certainly a lot of the content is from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and I was really, really humbled by his personality. And when I did more research into the background of the events of Saqifa, the political background, then I was able to understand Nahj al-Balagha better, because he is writing in the time of all his struggles and difficulties. And so
you mean by knowing the historical background of the issues.
Yes, yes. Otherwise you get a bit lost with his sermons, like what's he talking about, who's he talking to here. But if you study the historical background, then you know, that's who he's talking to, that's what he's talking about.
To reference to what subject?
To Safin, events of Safin, Jamal, yes.
Nahrawan.
Certain personalities that he's addressing, the fact that he lost so many of his companions and now he's talking to a new generation of followers who are not strong-hearted, who are not really with him, and you know, he's lost his companions. He's quite lonely, you know, wasn't able to communicate with people, talk to them like what is in his mind, in his heart.
For 25 years.
Yeah. So what I find is that in Quran, and also what we see in Nahj al-Balagha, is that human nature doesn't change. And I think that actually the Shi'i perspective on history teaches us very important lessons about human nature, which the Sunni version of Islamic history doesn't. Sunni version of Islamic history is that, it was a golden era, it was all wonderful, everyone was virtuous, it was so nice. But actually what the Shi'i version of history teaches us is that human beings are greedy and obsessed with worldly gain. They are cunning, they are two-faced, you know, they present themselves as one thing but they have a hidden agenda. And these are very, very important lessons for us even in this day and age, because human nature hasn't changed. So this is why I find it's very important actually to study the personalities that Imam Ali alayhi salam was having to deal with, because we find those personalities still exist in our day and age. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about the last lecture in the lecture part of the book, which I hardly understand, and you please forgive my ignorance. You wrote about following the scholars in the time of acculation. Can you teach me what is the meaning of that, and how can you elaborate this topic?
Okay, so it's occultation, which is ghiba, basically.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I mean, to connect between ghiba and modern scholars in our time, to connect that. How do you connect that?
Well, I haven't looked with this paper. What I was doing was looking at what the early scholars said about who we should follow and what we should do when we are living in the time of occultation. What is the method we should take in terms of learning about Islam and practicing Islam. And so I again was just referring back to the early sources for us to understand directly from the narrations what, as an example, the 12th Imam alayhi salam has said we should do. And actually since then, I mean, it's been a few years since I wrote that one, but I have since discovered more about the methods that the early Shi'i ulama theorized, around the 11th, 12th centuries. They, from the narrations, Quran and Hadith, they theorized certain methods of scholarship and Islamic practice that to provide some kind of framework. So, for example, there's a narration from attributed to the Imam of our time, alayhi salam, where one of his followers says, "What should we do about a particular issue when we can't communicate with you directly?" And he says,
at the time of ghiba.
Yes. He says, follow what you know until and unless you find something that adds to your knowledge or changes your knowledge. So essentially follow what you have, and then if you find something that adds to your knowledge or that might adjust your knowledge, then you follow that. So in a way, don't be in a state of anxiety about how we are not following Islam perfectly because we can't get direct guidance, at least through writing letters, through the Imam of our time. So he left some instructions, and he's left instructions about the type of scholars we should follow. They have to have done jihad on nafs and completely conquered their own selves, and they don't have any worldly desire. And so there is guidance on how we should practice in this era without ending up in this state of doubt and anxiety.
In one of the articles in this book, the article part of the book, you wrote about the wilaya as a response to the self-other dichotomy in European philosophy. I wonder if you can tell us about the understanding and finding of this article, especially within the Western philosophies, and how did you manage to use or connect your studies and your teaching to this specific subject?
Yes, I mean, when I was undertaking my studies at London University and looking at how Islamic culture is written about by Western scholars, or let's say non-Muslim scholars, what I discovered was that in European philosophy there is this thing called the self-other dichotomy, which is this idea that Europe is the self, so the West is the self, the West is us, we, and there's this assumption that we understand each other, we share a set of values.
West and the rest.
Yes, West and the rest. Exactly, yes. And so you have Western academics who have some good intentions, who kind of want to think outside of Western borders, and they want to engage with non-Western cultures. But so they, for example, who I quote in here, Fred Dallmeyer, who wrote Beyond Orientalism, and this is a collection of essays that he wrote where, or he compiled, where scholars are thinking, oh, okay, so how can I, as a Westerner, engage and understand someone who's not Western, who's from a different culture? But people who are not Western are called other. So actually, you're still setting up a problem, because you're still thinking of the West as self, me, we share a set of values, and outside the West as other, different, strange, and how do I engage with the other? And what I was arguing was that what Fred Dallmeyer is doing is still making the West the platform, the rule by which everything else has to be measured. Whereas, so I kind of I posited walaya as a model because I partly wanted to show that, well, from within Islam or Shi'i Islam, walaya is the foundation. That there's an entirely other foundation by which we can think about humanity and think about where are we within this framework of walaya.
My last question is, if I come back to the title of the book, you wrote about Shi'i spirituality for the 21st century. What is your expectation for the wider audience or scholars to understand from your book, and what is your aim? If I want you ask, if I ask you briefly, what is your final aim to publish this book for non-Muslims, especially for non-Muslim readers?
So what I've noticed with regard to, again, in the West, the market, the market on spirituality. If you go online and you look on Amazon or you look on Google or YouTube and you type in spirituality or books on spirituality, it's all books on what I call spirituality light, which is a kind of light, fluffy, cozy spirituality that is very much packaged for a Western market. And that spirituality is derived from the Hindu traditions, the Buddhist traditions, and the Christian traditions. But there's almost nothing from the Islamic tradition, and certainly not from the Shi'i tradition. So there are books on Sufism. Some of those books are what I would call, again, Sufism light. Some nice, fluffy, cozy spirituality, packaged for the Western market.
Luxurious.
Yes, kind of, you feel good when you read it. It's beautiful, some nice poetry, and then there are slightly more scholarly, traditional Sunni publications, and that will be more for better educated Sunnis who are interested in developing their spirituality. So they're interested in the spiritual, scholarly aspect of the Sunni tradition. But for the Shi'i tradition, there are more books coming out now, but still not that many that are accessible to Western readers and even Muslims in a Western environment. The Shi'i publications tend to be still, I would say, very much within the community, the Shi'i community, and they are not made easily accessible. I mean, alhamdulillah, I know there have been people who have really worked hard over the decades to publish, to translate and publish, and we are very blessed.
What is your current research or unpublished?
Well, I'm trying to finish a book which I wrote as a course for Islamic College on the history of spirituality in the West, which includes Platonism, Neoplatonism, the early Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, ancient Egyptian tradition.
For Muslim audience or for
both again, yes.
A textbook.
Textbook, yeah, that's a textbook. But what I want to do is to go back to researching more deeply the esoteric teachings of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam.
Interesting.
Yeah, and really crystallize. I don't know if it's possible, but to crystallize as much as is possible in a clear and orderly fashion what were their spiritual teachings, not just the moral and ethical teachings, but the practices that they passed on to their close Shia. So that's what I'm working on.
That can be the topic of our next interview.
Inshallah. I need your du'as.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.